Hey, it's your pal Mike Shea from slyflourish.com and twitter.com/slyflourish, and this is a special episode of Sly Flourish's Lazy DM Prep. Over the past whole bunch of weeks, I don't even know, I didn't even count, I have been preparing for my Waterdeep Dragon Heist game, and last Sunday I ran this game and completed it. So I thought on a Saturday rather than a Sunday, I would have a show and talk for an hour about how the game went and my overall thoughts on Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and offer some general tips and some specific tips for each of the chapters that I thought helped me run the game, make the game more enjoyable for myself and my group. Of course, it's just my experiences. It's one data point of thousands. So you should always take a look at the adventure yourself. I hope this will... My goal for this is not necessarily to convince you that my way is the right way to do it, but instead to get you thinking about other ways that you might run the adventure yourself, depending on what you enjoy. I have my two co-hosts are here. They went up there all on their own. I did not stage this. That is Maliki and Carson. Maliki is the black kitty on my, I guess on the video is on my right shoulder, and Carson is the tuxedo cat, and they are both up on their perch hanging out on a nice Saturday morning. Nice, relaxing Saturday morning. Let's see. I should get the chat open. I don't have my chat open. If you are here this morning, please say hello in chat. We can talk about whatever you like. I would like to keep it focused on Waterdeep Dragon Heist, but we could talk about anything as we do in previous shows. But I thought I would start with a description of how the final session went. So yeah, this is not going to be like a normal prep show where I go through all the steps of the Lazy Dungeon Master. There will be a show tomorrow. Tomorrow is Sunday, and tomorrow I will be preparing for a playtest of my Kickstarter, Fantastic Adventures Ruins of the Grendleroot. So if you want to hear more about one of the specific adventures, tomorrow we're running the adventure called Shatter. So I will be preparing for that on this show instead. And if you're interested in Ruins of the Grendleroot, or you want to hear about the adventure, that will be a good show to do it. Or you want to see me go through the 8 steps of Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. That's a good way to do it. What else? So this show, like all our shows, is thanks to the fine folks at Patreon, the fine backers of Sly Flourish on Patreon. Thank you for your support. If you join the Patreon, you will get a monthly newsletter of all of the Sly Flourish content that has come out over the past month, thanks to the patrons, and usually some other little extra secrets. For example, the Patreon backers are able to get already are able to sign up for the first Ruins of the Grendleroot playtest, as well as they get to see some of the exclusive art and some other things. So if you are a real fan of the work that I do and you want to give a little something back, you can drop $2 into my Patreon, and you will get a little bit more insider information, and you also get my undying thanks for joining. Also, as I mentioned, I am currently in the middle of a Kickstarter for a new book called Fantastic Adventures Ruins of the Grendleroot. There's a whole 1-hour video on my YouTube channel that you can watch if you want to hear all about that. I won't be talking about that today, but I always want to mention it. Tomorrow, you will hear a lot about it because I'll be preparing one of the adventures. Okay, so with all that said, let's talk about Waterdeep Dragon Heist. So in our last session, one of the characters had just gotten a face full of black pudding from the trap inside the Vault of Dragons, which is a great way to have a strong start, and it was a good time. The fun bit there was the character, I can't believe I already forgot. I already flushed all the character names from my brain. Was John the Grizzled. So John the Grizzled is this gnarly, this big gnarly dwarf, and he's all kind of, dirty, and his arm is all crunchy and stuff. And he got hit in the face with the black pudding, and it beat the hell out of him. It threw him against the wall and knocked him unconscious, and it made this like giant gum splatter out of him on the back wall of the vault. And the characters are all hurling firebolts and Eldritch blasts and all sorts of stuff against it. And when they beat it, and they did, John the Grizzled comes out, and he's got no hair and no beard, and he's perfectly shiny and clean, and his armor's all nice and shiny, and he's looking at everybody, and they're all looking at him, and they're like, "Man, you look good." And he's like, "What?" So that was pretty funny. The black pudding cleaned him up. So then the characters continued to navigate their way down into the Vault of the Dragons, and they came face to face with Aurinax. Aurinax is a young gold dragon that is protecting the gold, protecting the dragons of Waterdeep. I loved the sort of irony that they walk into this chamber and there's 500,000 gold dragons in a huge pile. And they're like, hey, we found the dragons of Waterdeep. And then from inside, a giant eye opens up and a gold dragon comes rising out of the gold dragons. There's something just kind of, I don't know, poetic about that whole thing. I really enjoyed that. So they're like, oh my God, a gold dragon. And the gold dragon's like, what the F are you doing here? And so they say, well, we're here on behalf of so-and-so. And they had a conversation with him, and over the course of the conversation and a couple of really excellent diplomacy checks, not diplomacy, what is it? A persuasion check. So Lord Anton Greycastle kind of steps forward. He's the noble of the group, and he's like, I am Lord Anton Greycastle, and he kind of bows, and he rolls like a 26 on his persuasion check. And the dragon's like, you're a Greycastle? Are you the grandson of so-and-so Greycastle? And he's like, I am. That's my grandfather. He goes, I'll be damned, And so they have this whole conversation about how the Greycastles are doing. And it turns out the Gold Dragon is a big fan of the Greycastles. And they have a strong the nice conversation with the Gold Dragon. And the Gold Dragon finds out that he's been trapped in the Vault of Dragons protecting this horde, supposedly, as far as he was concerned, from the cult of the dragon, who was going to use it to help resurrect or bring about Tiamat from Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat 5 years ago. And he'd been left there, and Raynar Neverember left him there. And he's like, he was super loyal to the Open Lord of Waterdeep, Raynar Neverember, and he thought the war was still going on, and he thought he was hidden down in this vault, and that up above, for all he knew, Waterdeep had been completely taken over by the Cult of the Dragon and by Tiamat. So he's like sitting on this gold, protecting it the whole time. And so they convinced him, no, everything's fine up above. In fact, Raynar was going to try to steal the gold. And he's like, oh, man. So he stands there, and then he starts with like, so what exactly are you going to do with the gold? You know what? I don't care. I can't believe Raynar Neverember did that to me. And he transforms into a dwarf, and he looks over at John the Grizzled and sees the hairless dwarf all clean, and he turns himself into a nice hairless dwarf. He's like, this is the new style these days, because I don't want to go out there looking like an idiot. And the guy's like, no, that's how we all look now. And he's like, okay, and out he went. And so that's how they dealt with Aurinax, right? Aurinax was this veteran of the War of Dragons that took place 5 years ago and had been left behind by Raynar and was very upset about this fact. So I thought that was a nice twist on Aurinax's plot line. I was just skimming through the adventure again for this show, and I realized that the Stone of Galore in the book tells you that there's an adult gold dragon guarding the gold, and I think that's kind of lame. It's much better as a surprise. I think it's a really cool surprise. So I would recommend not letting the characters know that there's a gold dragon guarding the horde, and let them discover it when they get to the horde itself, because I don't know that anybody would know, including the stone. So then they had the gold, and then they're sitting there, dragon's gone, and they've got 500,000 gold and a choice to make. And so their choice, they kind of thought about it, and I let them, I sat back and enjoyed their conversations about should we give it to the Grey Hands or to Blackstaff, or should we give it to Jarlaxle, or should we give it to the Cassalanters and help save their kids? And they knew that they had another path to save their kids. They knew they had another path for that, which is get 3 soul coins, and then they could work out a deal between the dragons. So they're like, we're probably not going to give it to the Cassalanters, but they decided to give half of it in one bag, which was an actual portable hole going to that they would hand deliver to Aja Blackstaff, and then the other one was an open portable hole that would dump it into to Jarlaxle's boat directly. And they said, well, we'll pour half of it into Jarlaxle's boat, and we'll put the other half in the portable hole, and we'll hand deliver that, and then we'll hopefully make each of them happy enough. And that way it's like, we're not giving it all to one. Jarlaxle had them pretty well convinced that, like, if you give it over to Blackstaff, you could be causing a civil war, right? She could take it, and she could use it to help make a move against the Open Lord, maybe, right? And maybe he was BSing, but, who can tell? They decided to do half and half, and they left the tower with their half 250,000 gold dragons in a portable hole. And who should they face outside but Victorio Cassalanter and Willifort Crowley and Top Hat, Victorio Cassalanter's bearded devil bodyguard, or Cambion bodyguard. And they're like, we want the gold. Give us the gold now. And the group is like, no. And they got into a huge fight. They cast the John the Grizzled cast Turn Fiend or whatever on Top Hat, who then failed a saving throw, and off he went. So he was gone. And then they fought Victorio Cassalanter, who cast Earthquake, and opened up these giant rifts to hell underneath them and almost collapsed the entire tower. But they managed to break the Earthquake and essentially broke his concentration, kind of. They cast Dispel Magic, and that doesn't really work that way, but whatever. I don't know. I don't know how Dispel Magic works in concentration spells. Can Dispel Magic dispel a concentration spell? Is that how it works? I don't know. Somebody in chat, let me know. Anyway, I did it because it sounded cool. So what then? So then they had to, so Victoria, so I gave Victorio Cassalanter some other stuff. So he has like a Dimension Door spell, but I actually let him also summon a, what did he summon? Was it an Ice Devil? Might have been, no, a Bone Devil. He summoned a Bone Devil in his place. So he teleported to the top of the tower and he put a Bone Devil in his place. And that switched him. He got just beat up by Anton Greycastle, who did a hit him with 5 attacks between his action surge and his normal attacks. Yeah, he's not your problem. Hey, welcome. Says, I tend not to be too literal with spell rules. Yeah, right. And that's what I did. Dispel Magic sounds like it would make sense to blast. And he rolled and had to roll a check against it. I think it was DT 18. So he had to, it still was a hard thing. It's kind of the equivalent. Like it's basically the equivalent of getting a breaking concentration. So whatever. I think it balances pretty well. So he teleported to the top of the tower after getting beat up, and then somebody cast Shatter on the base of the tower, and the whole tower broke, and Victorio Cassalanter fell, and he took like 10d6 falling damage from the top of the tower and broke his back when he hit the ground. And they went over, and the Aurinax, our warlock, a fiend patron warlock, had the dagger with the soul coin in and stabbed him and absorbed his soul into the soul coin and killed him. They then, I forget, they went over and killed Willifort Crowley. The Bone Devil disappeared when Victorio was killed, and thus they had their first mage soul coin. So one of the little hints was they can also save the Cassalanter children by either giving up the 500,000 gold to Asmodeus, or they can give Mephistopheles' agent named Izakul, who is actually the patron of Aurinax. They could give him 3 mages in 3 soul coins, and if they gave him that, then he would buy the contract out from Asmodeus' agent, and then the kids would be saved. So they had 1 mage, and they're like, what if we use it on, they tried to use it on Willifort Crowley, and he wasn't powerful enough. And they're like, uh-oh, who's another powerful mage? So then they go back to Trollskull Manor with their 250,000 gold. The other 250,000 went to Jarlaxle. And they go there, and there is Ammilia Cassalanter. And she's like, where are my children, and how are you going to save them? And they're like, yeah, about that. Why don't we go upstairs and talk? And she's like, okay. And she starts to walk upstairs and go, bang, and they hit her with the dagger and killed her outright and stole her soul. So now they've got 2 soul coins. And like, okay, well, now we need a 3rd. And they're like, who do, it was clear. I kind of screwed up. So I kept thinking, like, I'm going to make it 3 to make it harder. And maybe one of them will be willing to sacrifice themselves. It's kind of foolish because nobody wanted to sacrifice their own characters. They're like, no way, I'm not giving up my soul. Like, why am I any worse than anybody else? Sorry about the kids, but no, I'm not giving up my soul. So they kept thinking, like, can we buy one on the black market? Is there some evil mage we can kill? Could we go kill Blackstaff with it? That came up a little bit, and they're like, that's probably not going to work. And they said, well, let's talk to Jarlaxle. He knows people. And so JB Nevercott showed up a little while later. They know it's like it's the day before the kids' souls are going to be taken, so they know they don't have a lot of time. And JB Nevercott shows up, Jarlaxle's agent, maybe Jarlaxle, they don't know. And he says, I've got a present. And he opens it up, and there is a 3rd soul coin with a mage's soul already in it. Who knows where he got it? Nobody could find out. And of course, if anybody has a soul of an archmage stuck in a coin, it's Jarlaxle. And he says, I will give this to you, but I want the other half. You got to give me all the gold. And you got to work for me. And the characters are like, sure. So they're like, yeah, here's the other half of gold. Yeah, we'll sign contracts that say we now work for the, hey, there's Joe. Joe Kupski's here in the chat. Joe was in the adventure. So yeah, he's like, yeah, we're not sacrificing anybody. So they gave over the other half of gold. They signed a contract. The Greycastle family signed a contract that made them completely subservient to Zardoz Zord. I'm waiting for Joe to freak out. There's a time delay, so I got to sit here and watch Joe freak out in chat because that is not exactly what happened. So yeah, they created a partnership. There was all kinds of, like, I guess because Acquisitions Incorporated book came out, there's all kinds of contract talk about how the partnership between Zardoz Zord and Grey Castle Industries would work. But they came to an agreement that seems like it would work. And thus the characters now became... yeah, Joe's like, what? That is not how it worked. So now the characters, and I didn't think the players know this, but Joe probably... I'm sure a couple of them... I'm sure a couple of the players figured out that if you work for Zardoz Zord, you're actually working for Brigand Yarth. So now the characters are actually agents of Brigand Yarth. But they stuck a secret ring. It's a ring of communication. It's a ring of spell storing, but it also allowed direct two-way communication with Blackstaff. And they dropped the ring in the portable hole with the gold, which means it's sitting in Jarlaxle's pile of gold, is this ring that the Blackstaff has a connection to. And during the the narration sort of ended there, and then we went into what happens over the next few 10 days, and a lot of interesting things happen over the next few 10 days. Lord Anton Greycastle got married to Yagra Stonefist at a wonderful ceremony that took place in John the Grizzled's new retirement home, which is out in Sembia. Where was it? Yartar, out in there somewhere. Triborish. Is it Triborish region? Something like that. Out, kind of out in a nice place. So they had a nice wedding there. Aurinax, the Drow Pact of the Fiend Warlock, was sent by his patron down south to Baldur's Gate because he says something's happening down in Baldur's Gate and you need to go be there. Banjo Wilkerson. I don't quite remember what happened with Banjo. Joe, what happened with Banjo? Remind me. I'm sure everything worked out well for him. He kind of met Durnan again, and Durnan said, if you're ever in trouble, you can live back in the, you can always come back to Yawning Portal and work for me again. And he's like, I don't think that's going to happen. And the other interesting bit was Annabelle Lee, who was a new character that joined the game, who was a agent of the Blackstaff, met with Yajra Blackstaff, and she said, like, Yajra's like, I don't trust you, and I don't trust your friends. But you did put the ring in Jarlaxle's gold, so I know where it is, and I guess that's something. So we're gonna see, Joe says, does anybody pay any attention to Banjo? There was this wonderful rivalry between Banjo Wilkerson and Anton Greycastle that took place, and it's still taking place apparently, even after the game is over. So that was a wonderful ending to the game. I thought it had lots of loose threads. I love, when you have a big conspiracy game, it's a lot of nice loose threads that you don't have to clean everything up. So there was a nice, who do they work for? And there's something in Baldur's Gate, and the characters kind of split up, but some of them are still there. And do they work for Jarlaxle? And do they work for the great, like they're still double agents at the end of this thing, right? They haven't given up. Oh, and they saved the kids. They got all 3 coins. They gave the coins went, and then the kids are saved. Blah, 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 blah. He's Not Your Problem says, my party established a business relationship with Zardoz Zord for the Sea Maidens Fair to provide the entertainment for Trollskull Inn. Then they intercepted the letter from Jarlaxle to Lariel, and one of my characters really hates Drow and killed one of the gunslingers unprovoked. Wow. So now they're terrified to get back to Trollskull Inn, even though I, as a DM, have hinted that immediate payback from not hinted at immediate payback. So now they've made Jarlaxle a villain. That's pretty good. So that's one of the interesting things is like this adventure really has some fun bits about how to deal with villains. So anyway, so that's how the adventure ended. I was very happy with how it ended. This is my second go through of this adventure, and I enjoyed it the second time as much as I enjoyed the first. Always fear the DM. Yeah, always fear the DM. But what I thought I would do is talk a little bit. Let me switch over to my notes here. Sublime. I thought I would talk about my general thoughts about this adventure and things that I had changed that I thought worked well, and maybe things that I changed that did not work well. I don't know that I have many of those. I was pretty happy with it. So a couple of things. There's a couple of products I recommend, and a couple. Praxilix says a day early. There will be a one tomorrow too. So there's a two-parter. So today is let's finish up Dragon Heist. Tomorrow is let's look at the first playtest adventure that I'll be talking about for Ruins of the Grendleroot. So you will see a show tomorrow as well. But you can enjoy both, and they're all on YouTube. So one thought about is table handouts. I think table handouts work really well. And Joe, who's here in the chat, bought a Gale Force 9 map of Waterdeep. Really nice vinyl map of Waterdeep. It's $30 on Amazon. I think I have it over here. Let's see. Yeah, so it's $30 on Amazon. But it's a nice, big, beautiful map of Waterdeep. And I just enjoyed having it sitting out on the table. You know, it was just a nice thing to have. So there's something about, you know, so Joe likes handouts. I think handouts are probably an underappreciated, aid, right? That's terrible. That doesn't help at all. And just kind of having things on the table that sort of bring people into the world is nice. And so even if you're not using the map directly, just having the placemat out in front of people of the map of Waterdeep, I think is really worthwhile and probably worth the money. So there's like, what's the Beetle and Grimm set? Like, is this big $450 box full of stuff, right? And that's all great. You can kind of make your own version of the Beetle and Grimm set at a lower price by kind of buying different things and getting things printed out. So like printing out maps of the places, even if they're not tactical maps, is nice. Like having the Trollskull Manor map out so you can people can sort of think about that. Having the contract, there's a lot. If you go to DM's Guild, there's a lot of handouts that you can buy. I bought the Trollskull Manor handout. We actually had the signed contract. I don't think I used those as much as I should have. So that was something I would do. I should have brought those out and kind of spread them out on the table. The Code Legal, having a printed version of the Code Legal is really cool. I think there's lots of different things that you can make handouts for, printouts in particular. If you can, you could also take the images that are on the D&D Beyond version and print them either at like a Walgreens or somewhere else and have nice big like 8x10 beautiful glossy images that you can then show people the scenes that are going on. I think there's a lot of value in showing things. I want to do that more for my next adventure, which is going to be, well, what is it called? Ghost of Saltmarsh. Newspapers. Yeah, I pulled out the newspapers. There's a whole set of what are they called? They're not exactly newspapers. And I use them a little bit. The only problem is like they're pretty irrelevant. Like you kind of read what's going on there, and they didn't really have anything that was really directly tied, and people just sit there and read them all day and they don't really say anything. So I don't know that, yeah, they were cool, and it's probably worth looking at. But anyway, so I definitely recommend handouts, and I recommend this one in particular. Again, you can pick it up $30 from Amazon or go get it at your local game shop. I think it's probably about the same price. I don't know that they had a Dragon Heist map pack. I know they had it for Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Map set. Oh, this is different, right? Yeah, this is maps of each of the locations. That's kind of cool. $50. I don't know how big they are. I hadn't seen that. They have a DM screen. But what I didn't see, so like they have this... the maps and miscellaneous for Dungeon the Mad Mage, which I guess has cards and things like that and little layouts. That would actually, this I think would have worked better for Dragon Heist than probably works with Mad Mage. Anyway, spend some time on handouts. I think that's a valuable thing. Yeah, Joe said that's the set that wasn't great. Joe, do you think it would have been okay, even if it was only 8.5 by 11s, like laminated 8.5 by 11s? Do you think it'd have been worthwhile for the locations that were inside Dragon Heist, just to kind of give like, here's what the Cassalanter Villa looks like and things like that? I mean, the thing is like they're black and white maps, so you can print them out pretty much anywhere, and it costs you nothing. So I don't know that you need laminated ones. And since it's so cheap to print them out, you don't need a laminated one because you can write right on the other one, throw it away when you're done. Enjoy my coffee. So the other product I highly recommend is the Waterdeep City Encounters book. I really enjoyed this. I bought a physical copy. You can get a softcover version for $13, and the PDF and both of them for $15. It's probably worth having both. And I just loved this accessory. I pulled it out anytime the characters were wandering through the city. I'd pull this thing out and pull up an encounter. I can't seem to get that thing to work. Really cool. Let's see. Hey, look at that. Is that showing up? Yeah, it is. So it's a Guild Adept product. A bunch of the people that worked for, that actually wrote the adventure, like both Will Doyle and James Intercasso and a whole bunch of other people wrote for this product. And I'm just going to skim through it. You know, nice art. The art is all art that they used from a main book, but it's still a very beautiful product. And it's got these very big encounter tables that are very much like the ones that you would find in the random encounter. I think it's even way bigger than the random encounter set that they had in Tomb of Annihilation. So these big D100 different regions, you know, Castle City of the Dead, and then, you know, each one is sort of its own miniature encounter, and they have these sort of like, you know, 1 through 4, you know, Book Thief, you know, and the Book Thief one has 4 different potential options for it. So there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of potential encounters that you get on here, which is way more useful than, you know, just like 5 mages show up, you know, demon worshippers, you know, warlock, you know, you got a warlock of the fiend, cloaked babble, you know, all this kind of stuff that can go on. And, you know, it's just a really fun accessory that makes the city feel alive. And it's an easy, like, this is a great lazy accessory because you don't have to come up with the stuff, and you don't have to at the you know, drop of a hat come up with an interesting thing. It also makes travel in the city important or you know, noticeable, because like as they're going from one place to another, it's like, wow, a wild boar got free. You know, a wild boar got free and was chasing the butcher down, and we had to deal with the wild boar on our way. You know, that was even like a small one. It wasn't a great encounter either, but, you know, just, it's eventful and people remember it. So really, I think this book is definitely worth the investment. It's well rated, 67 ratings, 4.5 stars, mithril bestseller on DM's Guild. So obviously I'm not the only one who likes it. So I recommend it highly. I think it's even got more than that. I think that was part of it. Yeah, so it's got a whole weather system that I never even used, which is kind of a bummer. And then it's got a bunch of locations, a bunch of location encounters that can take place at different spots, and then stats. So I really just stuck to the random encounter part of the book, which I think is the bulk of the book. Yeah, then there's also like, you can have like a little encounter at all the places, and then a whole weather system. So, which I didn't really use. That would have been nice. I should have done that. Oh, well. What else? So let me go back to... So those are 2 products I highly recommend, and get, you know, put stuff out on there. I think that I'll put little X's next to these when I've talked about them to help me remember that I've talked about them. So the other one I think is interesting is, obviously you pick a primary villain when you're running the adventure. And I think that there's 3 are stronger than the 4th. So any of the 4 I think work. Jarlaxle, the Cassalanters, Manshun and Xanathar are all really strong villains. The one of them is a little odder than the other, and that's Jarlaxle and Brigandiarth, because they're not really villains. Like they're roguey. But I guess you could consider them more like, you know, if the Xanathar is like, you know, the rough version of the Mafia, then Jarlaxle and Brigandiarth are like the slightly less rough version of the Mafia. But they could still be a strong villain. So at first I was thinking like, well, don't make them the villain. Make them one of the other 3, because they're much easier to hate. But then I was thinking like, no, having Jarlaxle as a villain could be really interesting. You know, you're going to be in a bad spot, because I think he's probably the smartest of all 4 of them, right? He's got way more resources, and maybe Xanathar is worse, but Xanathar is also a little crazy, and Jarlaxle's not crazy. So the other interesting thing is, beyond picking your main villain, I was happy with the Cassalanters. Picking the Cassalanters was fun. It was kind of nice that I actually ran it during the summer, and we played the summer villain. The Cassalanters are a cool one because they're not really well known already, and everyone hates devils, and the whole thing with the kids can be fun. The one change that I made is that they wanted to save the souls of their children, and they weren't planning to murder everybody in the party. You could do that, of course, if you really wanted to be bad. I wanted them to be like kind of bad, but not really that bad, and mostly that they're evil, but their motivation is good, and I think that that's fun. I think that made it fun. So the other one is you can have secondary and tertiary villains as well. I would probably not have all 4 take place. So in this version, the Cassalanters were the primary villain. The secondary villain was the Xanathar, and the tertiary villain was Jarlaxle. And it was more like not even a tertiary villain as much as a rival, right? So I actually ran this adventure before with Manshun as the villain, and I love Manshun. He's one of my favorite Forgotten Realms villains. So I had Manshun as the primary, Xanathar as the secondary, and Jarlaxle was in it a little bit. but didn't really come into play. So that time I really only had two. It was the Xanathar, and I think they ended up giving the money to the Xanathar in that one too. And the problem with that one is, like, if you throw the characters in front of the Xanathar, they don't have any choice other than to say, sure, we'll do it. Because it's not, he's just going to disintegrate them and kill them all, right? So it's a little harder to have the Xanathar be anything but a shadow in the background. And I kind of liked having him as a shadow in the background. So, but I had Manshun as the villain, and that was really cool. And he had like other groups that were working for him. So that, you know, having like a rogue group of Zinterim agents that work for Manshun and want to bring the Zinterim back to the way it was back 100 years ago, I think that's a cool storyline too. So I think any of the villains can work as the primary, and then any of the secondary ones can work well. The problem is that, so you have a primary and a secondary. The primary is the one that they're like the most likely to get the gold if the characters weren't involved. The secondary one is like a harasser, and in this version of it with the Cassalanters, having the Xanathar be the harasser worked. So like every time they were kind of like stuck, or, you know, there was always this group that was out there. The Xanathar was always out there, and they were never really getting closer, and they were always way behind everybody else. But they did almost get the Stone of Galore during the chase, for example, and they do always send thugs, and they have other sort of villains out there. So they're kind of like a harasser. I think of them like the minions in Walker, Texas Ranger. You know, whenever he goes into a bar, there's like some good old boys that he's got to go roundhouse kick in the face. Those are the Xanathar guys. So that works really well. And then the rival, Jarlaxle, just works great as a rival. And I think I had him as a rival in both games, just because he's smart. He's playing the long game. He's not going to run around assassinating everybody. So I think he works well. But that idea of like, pick your primary, pick a harasser, like a secondary villain that's going to always kind of complicate matters, and is, you know, every time you see him, you just punch him in the face, you hate him. And then a rival, a group that you're kind of working with and kind of not, and you kind of want to thwart them, and they're kind of trying to thwart you, but you're sort of like, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, kind of. So that can work. I like that, how that played out a lot. So then I thought, let's see, I got about a half hour left, and I thought I'd go chapter by chapter and just talk a little bit about what I changed and what I thought worked well in that. But let's take a look at comments. Manshun is also very smart and has an entire faction at his disposal. So does he, like, not everybody in the Zinterim would work for a Manshun clone. Like, but the thing about Manshun is that he is one of many. There's a bunch of clones of Manshun, and you're facing one Manshun clone. In fact, I think I had him be a simulacrum. He wasn't even a true Manshun clone. And, sorry, I got a blanket around my legs to protect myself from cats, but they're sleeping, and I'm hot. Ugh. Sitting here sweating in this blanket. Now they're going to climb up my legs. I woke up the cats. So, we're like, what's that? So I think Manshun's got like a small order of Zinterim that are loyal to him, but not a ton. So I don't think that he's got, you know, the whole world of Zinterim working for him. You know, he's got some Zinterim. That's the thing about like Urstel Floxen, right? Urstel Floxen is a former Zinterim assassin. He's not one now, but he probably would still work for Manshun if Manshun was around. He's not your problem. Says, my party doesn't care at all about the factions and finds it confusing, so I'm trying to downplay the Xanathar and Zinterim as much as possible. The problem in the first chapter is too much focus on those two factions. That is true. I'm trying to treat it as a problem for the city, a background war between the two factions to add flavor. Yeah, and I kind of did a little bit of that, the Zinterim and the Xanathar fighting each other, because that is something that occurs heavily in chapter 1. And I downplayed that by having it clear that there was these devil worshippers that were actually doing things. When I talk about chapter 1, I'll talk about that. Why don't I talk about right now? So chapter 1... So there's like 4 main chapters in this book that run the whole adventure. Chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. But then there's also chapter 5 through 8, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Chapter 5 through 8 covers the layers of the villains. So it covers each of the major locations where each of those villains live. And there's a whole chapter for each one about what goes on there, but they're not part of the adventure proper. But the way that I ran it, I made it part of the adventure proper, and it worked really well. So I'll talk about that. So chapter 1 is a very straightforward adventure. You start off in the Yawning Portal. You get involved in fighting some stuff. You get a quest. Hey, my friend has got kidnapped. Can you go help my friend? You then go on a pretty lengthy adventure to go rescue whatever his name is. I can't remember the dude's name now. But you also get a hold of Raynar Neverember. What the hell's the guy's name now? Damn it. Somebody in chat will remind me of the name of the NPC you're trying to... Floon Blagmar. That's right. So you rescue Floon Blagmar. You also rescue Raynar Neverember, and that sort of gets you started on the idea that somebody tried to kidnap the deposed son of the Galt Neverember, and that's like an interesting plot line. The one thing I would do here is level the characters up quickly. Get them to level 2, probably before they go to the sewers. Maybe even before they go to the warehouse. So like I wouldn't be opposed to leveling them up right after the fight in the Yawning Portal. They have a fight, they have a conversation, they take a quest, bang, they're level 2. That way, the rest of the adventure, the rest of that chapter in particular is going to go a lot smoother when they have a little bit more hit points, a little bit more capability than they do. I think keeping characters at level 1 for a long time is a mistake. You know, I think we keep them at level 1. The published adventures tend to keep them at level 1 too long. And I think like a 2-hour adventure should be enough to get them from 1 to 2. So level them up faster, and then keep them at 2. You can keep them at 2 for a little while. I kind of had the characters level up a little faster, and that worked fine. So I felt like the rest of chapter 1 worked really well. The one thing I would do is make the warehouse is kind of empty, and you can put something in the warehouse that ties it to the villain. So when I ran it with the Cassalanters, it was a giant Dracolich skeleton that the other people had. Damn it, the other estate. So many freaking names in this. Anyway, there's a group that worked for the Cassalanters, Growlhunds. So the Growlhunds owned the warehouse on behalf of the Cassalanters. They couldn't afford to keep it up, but they owned it. So I made this like paper trail of the warehouse that tied it to the Growlhunds and then the Cassalanters. And it also tied it back to the fact that both of these groups used to worship Tiamat before the War of the Dragons. That brings in the War of the Dragons plotline. And I think that's an important plotline to bring up. I think it's a very big deal. A fun part of this adventure can be that you tie it to the events that took place during Hoard of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat. If your players did not play those, it doesn't matter. It's just background story. If they did play it, they're like, oh, I was part of that. Like, I remember that. So, you know, that was pretty cool. I think a couple of my players had played in Hoard of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat. At least, I think 3 of them probably had, or they certainly knew of it. And then for the rest, it was just like a fun background story. But that makes a lot of sense. So, tie the warehouse to the main villain, and that sort of gets past the problem that He's Not Your Problem was talking about, where you have Xanathar and Zinterim in the beginning, and then you get lost about who the villain is. You can kind of remind them later, like in chapter 2, they're like, oh yeah, wasn't that warehouse owned by that group? You know, or like chapter 3, they're like, wow, Growlhund, wasn't the Growlhund, you know, didn't the Growlhunds? I think you can actually, no matter what your villain, you can always have the warehouse can always be owned by the Growlhunds, and that ties it to your main villain. So do that. Well, consider that. Don't do it. But otherwise, chapter 1 runs smooth. It's really fun. It's a fun adventure. It's got, you know, it runs like any other traditional D&D adventure runs. Chapter 2 is a weird one and requires a fair bit of work. I talked a lot about this, so you can look at previous episodes where I dove deep into how to run chapter 2. The main thing is that you probably want to drop in your own side quests. There's really 2 things that happen here. I think it's like 2 main things that happen here. One is they build up Trollskull Manor. The characters build up Trollskull Manor. And 2 is they get involved with various factions. The book is pretty heavy-handed about the factions, and there's so many of them. What I would do is read through those faction quests and decide which ones grab you. And you're like, that one's interesting. I want to drop that one in. But don't try to drop them all in. Don't throw them all in front of your players and have them choose among 7 factions and 4, 5 quests each. It's like, you know, don't do that. Instead, pick a couple, and you don't have to pick even from those. You can make up your own. You can, you know, so that's what I did in this one. Is a lot of the quests that took place during chapter 2 were tied to the story loosely based on things they had already done. So don't go too heavy with the factions. The other one is let the players decide how granular they want to get with the upkeep of Trollskull Manor. Maybe they just want to throw money at it and have it done, or maybe they want to get deeply involved in how it takes place. But there's a dial there, and one dial is you just throw money at it and it gets better every time they come back. Another one is they actually have to go meet people. And so in the game I ran, and I didn't really have that question with the players. I didn't really bring it up, but it kind of worked out that they had a hired agent who worked for them, Hammond Craddock, who was a friend of one of the characters. And he said, look, I'll take care of all the bureaucracy of getting your place up and running. And he did. You know, he took a cut. He took like a 5% cut. And that way Trollskull Manor was like getting rebuilt throughout the whole adventure. And I think that worked well. So Joe says, another great tip, cross-reference other hardback or even older adventures in what you're running. Farron lore is rich and really creative. Yes. So you can always kind of tie back. Particularly, it's nice to tie back to adventures that the players have played in, so they have that sort of focus. But there's a lot of lore that you can kind of dive into. So anyway, chapter 2 takes some work. So you're going to want to think about it, read it. I would not run it as is. I would drop, heavily customize your own quests and your own events that take place during chapter 2. Choose the factions carefully, and decide how granular you want Trollskull, the whole upkeep of Trollskull Manor to go. And then drop that fireball in whenever you want. Remember that the fireball, which is the beginning of chapter 3, you can put it in as soon as things get boring. So as soon as the player's like, I don't know what I'm doing, you go, bang, fireball, right? Not in the party. But, you can drop that fireball on chapter 2 or chapter 3 in whenever you feel like chapter 2 is going too long. You could probably do it really early too. He's Not Your Problem says super focused on the tavern. They want to do job interviews, etc. Yeah. So they're like, so He's Not Your Problem says that his group is really into the tavern. And that's the thing. Like your group is going to have to decide how into it they want to get. I would let them make that choice, and you kind of work with it. Then eventually drop that fireball on. So chapter 3 runs as well as chapter 1 ran. It's got a really cool heist of Growlhund Villa. The investigation of the fireball and the incident of the fireball is really good. Again, I have episodes. What are they fighting? What are you guys up to up there? What are you guys doing? They have the investigation of the fireball, kind of tracking it back to Growlhund Villa. I think that works really well too. The one thing I would avoid is that there's some red herrings that they drop in this one, and I would avoid the red herrings. I don't think that the red herrings offer much. And players have enough hard time keeping track of what the hell is going on in a story. Don't be like, if your group is like Sherlock Holmes and they're just eating through your storyline, maybe you want to drop some red herrings. Typically, it's hard to keep everybody's attention on the whole game anyway. So I try to keep, let them discover things and let them find a plot, but you don't have to, go out of the way to like drop fake clues. Life's hard enough. But other groups that might vary. So the heist at Growlhund Villa is really good. The one thing I remember here is like the villains have a bad day as part of the storyline, right? Like they made accidents and they made mistakes, and if they had done it right, everything would have been smooth. Chapter 3 is also where you learn heavily about the Stone of Galore and everything going on there. So it's really right back into the plotline again. Chapter 1 is real narrow, then it widens out to infinity in chapter 2, and then it narrows back down to the main storyline, and it's a fun one. So chapter 4 is the chase, and this is another chapter like chapter 2 that takes a fair bit of work to kind of convert into something that works really well. I found, again, maybe you run the chase and maybe it works really well for you. For me, I turned it into an investigation, and I decided that the characters, basically it was like, well, where did the stone go when Erstalfloxen had it in hand and left Growlhund Villa? Where did he go, and where was it headed? And then regardless of what the characters did, this is the path that it's going to take. And then, I had 6 or 7 different paths that I took from the path line that's in the adventure. The only difference was it wasn't to chase. My intention was that the stone is going to get out of the hands of the characters. Like maybe they get it, but maybe they don't, right? And they're probably more likely not to get it than they are to get it. But if they do get it, they should get it at the end, which means you push the stone 3 or 4 scenes out. You don't want this situation. One thing I think is a mistake in chapter 4 is you don't want a situation where like the stone is always just 50 feet ahead. If I could just reach it, I could get it. You really want to push it pretty far ahead. Maybe they get a glimpse of it, but they're not likely to grab it. And if they do, let them, right? If they manage to grab the stone, let them grab it, because it's lame to make it not, I think it's lame to kind of circumvent player characters when they actually manage to do something. The whole, there isn't a fixed formula for this stuff. That's why we're running the kind of D&D game we're running. So, so I recommend using it more as an investigation. The characters are following the path that the stone took. And generally, the stone made it to the villain, right? And that's something that I change heavily in chapter 4 is the stone makes it to the villain. And I was really glad I did that in this one. It ended up with the Cassalanters, and that's where we get to chapters 5 through 8. So 5 through 8 are basically chapters that are not part of the main adventure and describe the lair of the villains and the circumstances at that lair. And in my case, it was the Cassalanters. I haven't really read the other 3. And the point here is the Stone of Galore is there, and the characters have to get it. And these villains are tough enough that you can't just go in and kick the door down and stab them all in the face and take the thing. You're going to have to figure out how to steal it. And that's where Dragon Heist comes in, right? One of the arguments about this book is it's called Waterdeep Dragon Heist, but there isn't a heist. This is where you put in the heist. And the Cassalanter one worked really well. Again, you can watch previous episodes where I went through the details of how that worked out. But essentially, there's a big party going on at the Cassalanter's villa, and at the same time, the characters are trying to infiltrate Cassalanter Villa to steal the Stone of Galore. It's down in the basement in a temple to Asmodeus. There's a big ceremony going on down there. It's strapped to the chest of the son who's been converted into a chain devil. You got to get that. Lots of interesting bits to role play, lots of exploration, lots of heist. They get to choose the approach. The characters get to choose the approach and how they're going to go in there. Really fun scene, and I really enjoyed running it. You know, I think the players enjoyed playing it, so I liked that. And then at the end, they get the stone. And now that they have the stone, we go back to Chapter 4 and get him into the vault. Now, one of the things that I hadn't really paid much attention to either time that I ran it is there's supposed to be a bunch of keys to get into the vault. That you get the Stone of Galore, and the stone tells you where the vault is, and also says, by the way, you need to get 3 keys. And now you're on these new quests to go get the keys. And I thought that was too much. I was like, by the time you get the stone, it's like you just got the MacGuffin. You don't want a MacGuffin that then sends you off for 3 other MacGuffins. Like, oh my God, you know? So both times I ran it, I skipped all that, and the stone is the key, right? The stone says, here's the vault, and here's how you get in. And then you get into the vault with the stone. And that, I don't know that anybody missed it. I've never run it the other way, so I can't say, like, actually, no, people really like the keys, but it just felt too much to me. I was ready to be done. I think the players are ready to be done. You're hitting that downward hill in the roller coaster. It's time to get off the ride. And so I skipped the keys completely. And then had them go into the vault. And the vault works really well as is. The one change I'd make for the vault I mentioned earlier is I would make the dragon, the primary motivation of the dragon is to protect the gold from the cult of the dragon and from Tiamat. And the dragon thinks the war is still going on. So it's pretty easy to negotiate with the dragon who isn't aware of what's going on up above. But if he fails, you might have to fight the dragon. Make it a young dragon so they actually have a chance of beating it down in case it gets into a fight. But otherwise, they could convince it like, no, you're being hosed, you know. And I think that that works. I would also make the dragon a secret until they figure out that it's there. So then, when they have the gold, then the final thing is figuring out who they're going to give it to. And I think throughout the entire adventure, kind of putting all the factions in place of all the people that want the gold, and all of them have good reason to get it, and all of them have. It's sometimes for the characters, they're like, they have good reason to want to give it to those groups. So they have to decide where the gold goes. One thing I'd suggest there, and I've seen this happen with multiple groups now, is they'll almost always pick half and half, right? Like, let's try to do 2 of the 3. And so you want to think about, like, it's not enough to say, here's 3 options. Which one are you going to pick? It's oftentimes they're going to try to figure out how to, try to game 2 or 3 of them. So, don't try to negate that, but just think about like how that works, right? Like, how does it work if half the gold goes to Blackstaff and half of it goes to Jarlaxle? In this case, it all went to Jarlaxle, but it was still like a spy thing. I think it worked out great. Just, there's an analog dial on there, not a digital dial. So it's not 1, 2, or 3. It's like maybe somewhere between 2 and 3. So that can work really well. So overall, I like this adventure a lot. I don't know where I'd rank it. Curse of Strahd is still my favorite adventure of all time. I love Curse of Strahd. I think it's the best adventure that's ever been written, frankly. Really, really love that adventure. This is a good one. It's a fun city-based adventure. My only argument is that probably about 3 of the chapters, 2, 4, and 2, 3, 2, 4, and 5, require a little bit of work of the DM to manipulate into a situation that fits well for an adventure. It is a good toolkit. Some people have argued that the Enchiridion at the end is not rich enough. I found the Enchiridion to be great. Like, that was exactly as much material about Waterdeep as I wanted. I think when you mix it with the Waterdeep encounter book, I think it's fantastic. And I think when you throw more table handouts, it's also really good. So it's a fun, short adventure. We got to level 6. I don't remember how many sessions it was. I'd have to go back and look at how many sessions we ran. But, more than a dozen, I think, it was a good number of sessions. I mean, let's see, maybe probably 2 or 3 per level. So, 18-ish, 15 sessions. Maybe Joe can tell me. But I think it worked really well for those. So I think it's I think it's a pretty good adventure. Probably put it in the middle of the pack. I think it's probably better than Princes of the Apocalypse. It might be better than Out of the Abyss. That's a little hard. I liked Out of the Abyss. I particularly liked the first half. I never actually ran the second half of Out of the Abyss. I didn't like it as much as Tomb of Annihilation. Tomb definitely has some issues, though. And then by thinking back on Tomb, I still think it's a great adventure, but I do think the Tomb is too long and too hard. Curse of Strahd's still number 1. Horde and Rise, they were written so early on in 5th edition that I think it's though they need a lot of work too. So I'd probably put there. I actually think that here's a fun, if you want to run like a 3-year campaign, a really fun campaign is run Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat. You're going to have to do a bunch of work to get it to work. Then retire those characters. Then jump about 3 years ahead and run Storm King's Thunder. And the villain from Storm King's Thunder is an ancient blue dragon that is connected to Horde and Rise, and she's sort of angry about the fact of what happened there, and she's going to use the giants as revenge against the Sword Coast for the fact that Tiamat failed. But really, it's because she feels bad that she wasn't involved in the whole thing in the first place. So that also ties in. So you have this other big campaign, and then you have Dragon Heist, which is much more narrow, but it's still tied to the events that took place in Horde and Rise. So to me, like, you know, my own version of the Spell Plague, or the you know, whatever the big event that happens in Forgotten Realms. To me, the event that matters in my Forgotten Realms was the Rise of Tiamat. You know, like that was the event that really shaped the Sword Coast in these years, and you can always sort of tie threads back to what happened there. Prince of the Apocalypse, not so much. The other adventures don't tie as closely, but I think that there's a lot of fun sort of tying back to those events. But then you can let it go. Like Tomb of Annihilation didn't. Storm King's Thunder did. Obviously, Curse of Strahd does not. So you know, you can kind of play off of all of those. Yeah. So that is Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Folks in chat, do you have any thoughts or questions? Any recommendations that you want to pass along to people who are going to run this adventure? Joe, what were your favorite parts? What would you have preferred ran differently? You know, having played in this game, it's very cool to have one of my players in the chat. Yeah, He's Not Your Problem said he found Curse of Strahd the easiest to run. I think I agree with that. I'm trying to think if there's any book that was easier. I think that was easiest to run. I think I agree. Yeah. I mean, I think it's the best, and I think you can do a little bit of work with it. I think what I found with Curse of Strahd is that it is the book that offers the most options for the DM to customize it without needing to. So like I made that adventure my own, you know, a lot. And I do have some articles. I do have some articles about what, you know, ways to kind of customize Curse of Strahd. There are a few things that I think really make that adventure shine that aren't in the book. But generally, I think you can run it as is. I definitely recommend running Death House. Like, it's got this wonderful first, second level adventure in there called Death House, and it's right in the book. It's a great way to go. So that you know, just solid 1 to 12 adventure, one big campaign adventure. I think it's my favorite one. It is my favorite one. Joe says, heists are the most fun. He loved Growlhund, loved having the opportunity to set up Trollskull. That's cool. Any tips for the fight with Strahd? Yeah, sure. Let's go to Sly Flourish. So, running Curse of Strahd. Do I have... Yeah, here we go. Running Strahd von Zarovich. So there's a couple things. You say about to run it for your player. So one is, are you running it as a fight, or is this their first meeting? And one of the things that I really like is that you can have... so here's a couple of articles. This is called Running Strahd von Zarovich. And then there's another one called Strahd's Negotiation. And those are two. So if you ever want to find these articles, go to Start Here on Sly Flourish. And down below, I have articles about all of the published adventures, including a whole bunch for Curse of Strahd. So you can see all the Curse of Strahd ones here. Same with Storm King's Thunder, Tomb of Annihilation, and then I'm going to add my Dragon Heist ones here when they're done. I should be done pretty soon. So any of the articles like that you can always find on this. Yeah. So Snuggy says, I think people need to remember that the books are guidebooks. That everything that you know you need to make them your own. I think that's true. I think that examples like Curse of Strahd and Tomb of Annihilation, to me, they make it a little easier for the DM to customize them. Waterdeep Dragon Heist, in my opinion, needed to be customized. I had to do stuff with Chapter 2, and I had to do stuff with Chapter 4, and I didn't feel like they gave me all the tools to do that as easily as possible. You gonna fall out? No, you're just gonna sleep like that. Hello, kitties. They went to the vet yesterday. You guys cost a fortune. Cats. I like that they hang out down here during the chat, though. So I think that adventures can do a better job. To me, this is, so now I'm speaking as both a consumer of published adventures and a producer of published adventures, that I think the goal of an adventure should be to give the DM a toolkit to make it as easy as possible for them to run their own stories. And I think that Curse of Strahd and Tomb of Annihilation are two of the ones that I think do the best job. Their size is right. Like, they have big areas, they have lots of locations, they describe the locations well, they offer lots of toolkits, there's lots of things that you can customize, but also, you can run it pretty close without having to change much. They're beautiful adventures, they have clear plot lines. I think that they're both very good. To me, adventures that don't do as well are ones where they don't make it super clear how things work. I think like Princes of the Apocalypse, the construction of it is a little weird and hard. I'm now running it a second time and still kind of running into the same problems I had when I ran it the first time. I think that Horde of the Dragon Queen assumed too much. They had this hard part of like, we got to get the characters. Like, the first couple chapters of that book are great, and then there's this like long ass journey, and it's like, it makes all these assumptions about how that journey goes. And it's sort of like the chase in Dragon Heist. That works great if that's the way they go, but if they go a different way, like, how does it, how do you connect them again? So I have a whole article about that, and that's a problem with that was particularly a problem with Horde. Rise was more toolkit like, but I think at that point my characters were so on their own that I sort of reworked it completely. Snuggie says, I'm having to rework Princes because the party destroyed Redlark. Wow, okay. Yeah, if you destroy Redlark, that's a whole different thing. He's Not Your Problem says, I do more prep work for Dragon Heist to keep it relevant to my party's interest than the other hardback books. Yeah. So, and one key, and I really think that I'm gonna bang on this one. Session 0. I'm not saying like a session 0 is your problem or anything like that. I have no idea. But I'll tell you, running session 0s, and we did it for Dragon Heist and we did it for Tomb of Annihilation, and it worked really well of deciding who was going to, here's the Tomb of Annihilation session 0. Like, what do you define? The theme of the adventure, the truths of Chult, loaded questions for the characters, so that the characters are built to run that adventure. I think that that's a really valuable thing to do. I did it for Dragon Heist, and like, I made it clear. Let's see, I'll go find it. Dragon Heist Chapter 2, Chapter 1, Session 0 of Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Describing exactly what it is. Like, it's an adventure of investigation. So don't build, this is much more like LA Confidential or Jackie Brown than it is like, The Sting. Describing it's an adventure of an investigation and mystery. Characters should have a solid motivation to investigate mysteries with their companions in the city of Waterdeep. Urban adventure, not likely to leave the city or leave it very long. Combat takes a backseat to role-playing investigation. Characters should have something to do in role-play scenes. These are all like the things that I think you should just hand to players and be like, this is, consider building characters for this. Key skills, right? I think this is kind of a neat idea of, here are the key skills that you're going to want to make sure your characters have, somebody in your characters have, and discuss this early. 3 facts about Waterdeep, right? And this is where you can see, like, it's been 5 years since the War of the Dragon Queen. Towns, villages lost tremendous amount of coin rated thing. Lord Dagalt Neverember lost his seat as Open Lord. The new Open Lord, Lara Silverhand. Crime is on the rise. There's multiple factions going up, and Vajra Blackstaff Saphir has activated independent forces, Force Grey, and the Grey Hands. Those are 3 great facts about this adventure, and pardon me for pitching my own stuff. And then it's going to end. Like, don't expect your characters are can keep going after this. Like, you can, and there's a whole thing about like, after this you get a note from, what's his name at from Durnan, who says, hey, don't you want to go down to the Undermountain? And so they wrote the 2 adventures together to kind of go that way. But I think that's weird, because the end result, the type of characters that fit well with Dragon Heist, I don't think are the ones that fit well with Undermountain. But I don't really know Undermountain that well. What are you guys up to? I think somebody just got booted. So, so I really recommend a session 0. I have these character connections. So this is a good article that I recommend. Hey, look, and I've even got my session 0 video here. This is a good article. People should read it. So, so session 0 I think helps a lot with published adventures, and I tend to do it with all of them. I'm not doing it for my Grendleroot ones because I'm only running like 2 or 3 of those adventures, so I figure like I mailed stuff ahead of time, and then we'll figure it out. But we'll be talking about that tomorrow. So it is 11 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for spending the time with me. If you've been watching these, if you've been watching these videos over the past bunch of weeks on how to prepare for Waterdeep Dragon Heist, I hope that you found them entertaining, maybe a little useful. We are going to continue on with this series. I'm going to do probably 3 or so episodes on some Grendleroot playtest adventures that I'm running. So if you want to see the kind of adventures in Runes of the Grendleroot, Kickstarter's going on now, by the way. You will see that next week. And then I will be doing Ghosts of Saltmarsh. So we will have a whole series of these where we're focusing on Ghosts of Saltmarsh. So I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank Joe. Joe, thank you for coming into the chat and helping out, talking about what's been going on. I want to thank everybody else that came into the chat to talk today. It's always great to have a good time with you guys. And I will see you all tomorrow. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, talking about Grendleroot. Thank you all very much. Have a great day.